Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of RPG Radio, we're playing our Infiltrator again, our melee / ranged character, both the Nightblade and the Inquisitor all wrapped up into one, and we're still in normal. We're still doing a little bit of farming. We're fleshing this build out a bit harder than some of the other builds on this channel because I really would like to see it progress. Well, see its progress in Ultimate. So, if you're here for that, strap in. I've got a lot more stuff to talk about on this video for this class, but let's get started. Now, I talked about it a little bit in the last video, but I do want to mention it again. The runes in this build from the Inquisitor side of things are going to be very important for damage. And because of that, the way that you play your character and how you play around those runes is really how you're going to be doing a lot of your damage. Where you place them is important because they do take time to arm, and how you lead enemies into them is important because that's where all the damage is. The good news is you don't have to max either of these abilities right away. I'm only at level 50 fairly recently with this build, but even still, I only have both of these abilities right around 8 to 10 points. So, with that being said, I do have 1 or 2 points into both Chill Surge and Ignition, which are the modifiers for these abilities, making them even better. But more importantly than both of those, as we open up this monster shrine and incinerate everything coming out of it, is going to be artifact handling. You do want to get to artifact handling as quick as possible because artifact handling is going to reduce the cooldown on both of these abilities, increase their damage by 12% in total, and it's going to add a 20% crit damage option to them as well. So, all of that being said, with the number of runes that you can just drop on the floor when you know an enemy is coming, these things are going to absolutely nuke anything that steps on them, and you do really need these to work when it comes to certain bosses, when it comes to certain events that you're getting into in Grimdawn. This is your damage, and you really have to learn how to play around it. Luckily though, with those runes, that means we get a lot of traction out of our ranged weapons. So, in this video, I have actually got 2 ranged one-handed weapons, and those are going to be the Frigid Barrel of Relentless North. Both of these are actually going to, well, apart from doing the identical thing, they're doing the exact same thing. They give points into Amaras's Blade Burst, which is the second most important, well, I suppose third most important ability of the ranged half of our build. Because Amaras's Blade Burst is usable in range, it is an AoE, and it's also going to allow us to activate the Tsunami Devotion, which is going to shotgun out a huge wave of damage that is cold from underneath our feet. Basically, anytime that you use Amaras's Blade Burst, that is going to happen, doing a whole bunch of damage right in front of you, which is really important when things start to get close. That said though, there are plenty of options with the early game ranged weapons. You can go for the Marauder set. There is a belt and 2 guns that are, one's fire damage and the other one's cold damage, which are exactly the type of elements that we're going for in this build. But the set itself does increase a good number of stats and gives you a decent chunk of damage when playing this build to do the right type of stuff. So, that being said, let's swap over to the melee side of things because that is a little bit more complex. Right now, I got lucky enough to kind of move into more, well, at least later game melee weapons. And we've got the Bloodlord's Vengeance, which is modifying the Aura of Censure on the Inquisitor side of things, giving it more fire damage and increasing the area in which it will do damage. And then there is the Crescent Moon. This is a legendary one-handed axe that is giving 1 point to Phantasmal Armor, 1 to Shadow Strike, 2 to Chill Surge, 1 to all skills and Nightblade on top of that, and it has a passive ability, 15% chance to activate, in which it will reduce offensive and defensive ability along with cold resistance on the enemies that it goes off on. So, we've got 1 melee weapon dealing fire, 1 melee weapon dealing cold, and 2 ranged weapons dealing cold right now. That will ultimately change. The way that I want this build to work when we get to ultimate is to have 1 set of weapons dealing fire damage and 1 set of weapons dealing cold damage, but as it stands right now, we're not really in the gear farming phase, so we're just picking up what works best. As that is currently the case, let's talk about 1 small set that we've got going on. It's called the Praetorian. Praetorian is a level 50 set that you can pick up pretty early on that will give you a lot of very decent defensive stats for your character, and because we're so teeny tiny in the health department when it comes to the Infiltrator, that's really important. So I've got both the Praetorian chest guard and shoulder guard going on, which gives us 15% physical resistance, as well as a whole bunch of pierce, elemental resistance, offensive and defensive ability, vitality, and reduced crowd control duration in certain aspects as well. So super awesome for basically just being defensive, keeping your character alive, which is definitely the name of the game when playing it this way. Apart from that, we're still using Vendetta as our relic, and that's just the one that's going to fire off a cleansing blade, 15% chance on attack. So basically we fling it out every 15% of our attacks. Because we've got so many AoEs, because we do a lot of fairly quick attacking with our ranged weapons, it happens fairly often. Not to mention the relic itself gives us +1 to all skills in Inquisitor, which at this point is really important. We did manage to pick up in the Ugenbog a belt. It's called the Ugenbog Waistguard, and this is actually providing +1 to all skills in Inquisitor as well. So we've got quite a few pieces of gear, adding +1 to everything in Inquisitor, which is really spicy, because the big damage items in this, or the big damage skills in this kit currently, are both Inquisitor abilities. Gloves wise, this was actually pretty easy to come across. I got the Void Rend Talons from the just finishing the game, talking to Inquisitor Creed at the end of the base game experience. Void Rend Talons aren't doing the kind of damage that we need them to, but Doombolt is actually really helpful for how often it goes off, which is about 10% of the time, and the attack speed, as well as the Aether and Elemental resistance coming off of Void Rend Talons, is pretty helpful as well. This isn't going to stick around for Ultimate or Elite, but as far as normal is concerned, this is giving you enough stats to really kind of cinch the build the way that it's headed. After that, let's see. The boots, Emberstone Treads, are giving you +3 to Ignition, which is a huge number, and Ignition is a big increase in damage because that is going to affect our Rune of Calistar. That means that they are going to knock back when they explode, and they're going to deal additional damage, which is fantastic. Now, there is also a couple rings that we picked up in Ugenbog, the Vine Ring and Living Ring. Both of these add a pretty decent chunk of passive stats to our class in the form of energy regen, health, vitality resistance, but even more beyond that, we're getting points into 3 points, specifically into Rune of Calistar, and 3 into, well, Nadala's Hidden Hand isn't particularly great, but it's there if we ever decide to put some more points into the stand and fight style of melee. But the Living Ring is 3 points into Word of Agony, which is a modifier for Word of Pain, which is yet another Inquisitor skill that's doing elemental damage and making things a lot easier for us to kite out into the runes. So a lot of what you might see in these videos is me laying down a whole bunch of runes and then getting these enemies' attention by hitting them with an auto attack, or more likely hitting them with a Word of Pain, because Word of Pain hits in an AoE, it does the same type of damage, and it is going to slow their attack speed as they come at us as well. Word of Agony, the update there, it's going to give the ability a chance to blind the targets that get hit, which is, I mean, that's good enough. You want them to not be able to do as much damage to you as possible. The more that you can avoid, whether it's through deflect or dodge, you're only going to be helping to do that when you have blinded them as well with the Word of Pain. Death Sentence is going to be reducing Pierce and Aether and Chaos Resistance on top of all of that, but Death Sentence is more just kind of flat damage added on to Word of Pain at the end of stuff, so that will really be where all of the points go if we're going to max out Word of Pain. It'll be Word of Pain and Death Sentence, but that's not to say that the ring is completely useless, because it is doing quite a bit for us. Now, in contrast to the last video, I also picked up Pneumatic Burst this go around because of the second modifier on Pneumatic Burst being Shadow Dance. I mentioned this in the last video, but Shadow Dance gives you a percentage chance in both the dodge and deflect, which is a chance to avoid melee attacks and projectiles, and currently at level 5, that's a 12% chance increase, which is pretty good considering you don't see those things up to date or you don't see them, the values do not get very high with those particular passives. So 12% is a big number in both of those categories, even though it is only while Pneumatic Burst is active. The amount of times that we can have Pneumatic Burst active to get those stats is pretty often. Couple that with Word of Renewal on the Inquisitor side of things, and you have two very decent heal buttons, which we're going to get some more points into later. Word of Renewal also giving you move speed and defensive ability. It's just, both of them are all around very, very good tools for staying alive, which is quite a bit more difficult on a squishy character than it is on the tanks that I am used to. So, all that being said, that's kind of an in and out, easy version of gear and abilities that I think are really important. Some things that I removed are going to be the dual blades ability for the Nightblade. You don't actually need dual blades to use two single-handed melee weapons. Back to Pneumatic Burst, you can actually take Breath of Belgothian instead, which is also going to reduce the cooldown of Pneumatic Burst, as well as increase the health regen that it gives you. So you can take Breath of Belgothian for 1 point, forego taking dual blades, and have yourself kind of more utility. Dual blades is fine because it was giving us physical resistance, which is really, I mean, not important until later stages of the game, but mainly the reason I took it in the first place is to use two melee weapons, because I was thinking, oh, dual blades and ranged expertise, that just makes sense, let's pick up both of them. When it turns out that I can get exactly what I need with 1 point into the modifier for Pneumatic Burst instead. All that being said, it may change. I don't think it will though, because dual blades just is, this build is not going to be focused on standing still and dealing damage with your melee weapons. Your melee weapons ultimately will be dealing more damage than your ranged weapons, but we have them more focused on dealing short bursts of damage to kill bigger enemies that are lingering about, not being killed by the runes or anything to that effect. So that brings me to the Nightblade Shadow Strike, which is going to be super important for this build. You'll also want to pick up Justifiable Ends and Nightfall because, no, Hidden Hand is the thing on the ring. Justifiable Ends is the important one. Nadala's justifiable ends on Shadow Strike reduces the cooldown of Shadow Strike, which you want to have up very often because it is your finisher. And then Nightfall you'll want to have with some decent points later on in the game as well, because Nightfall basically turns Shadow Strike into something of an AoE ability, meaning that you should be able to kill more enemies in an AoE who are at lower health because reasons. You get it. You see where I'm going. It makes sense. Blade Trap I don't think is going to survive into the next episode, so if you're attached to that in your playstyle, feel free to keep it. I don't see it doing enough for me, and I think I can compensate for the lack of it with some better rune placement and some more cheeky use of Word of Pain. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we've covered everything. I mean, ranged expertise and bursting round I mentioned in the last video, but I think those are just passively as good as they're going to be. Devotions I really haven't nailed down for this build yet because at the moment they're kind of all over the place. We only really have 2 activatables at the moment as I live and breathe. Number 1 being Tsunami, which is always activatable with Amaras's Blade Burst, and being just generally probably one of my favorite lower level devotions. It's fantastic. The next is Amatok, the Spirit of Winter, and that is the blizzard that rains down when our Rune of Hagard gets a crit. We also don't have a whole lot of offensive ability going on in this build just yet, so that's going to have to be something that we build towards in Elite and Ultimate 2. Going to really have to beef that up. But as far as other devotions are concerned, we've got to build up some more points to get over to Leviathan for the cold damage and the whirlpool coming off that. And then beyond Leviathan, I think Olswin's Torch is probably... I mean, the Meteor Rain is still good, but I don't know if we're going to have enough points to get over there. I'm not entirely sure. So that's still up in the air. Like I said, it's a work in progress. I know that I want Leviathan, so I'm building towards that, and I'm definitely going to keep Spirit of Winter and Tsunami. But right now, the other things that I've got going on are Quill, Scholar's Light, and we're starting on Harpy for some purples. But ultimately, each of those is just really helping with elemental damage, some resistances, and other kind of basics passive stats. Not really anything activatable to speak of, or that you really need to pay attention to when you are playing character. So check back next time for devotions once I get this character up to ultimate and I have things more fleshed out and figured out. That will be much more in depth. But apart from everything that we've talked about in this video, there really isn't much more to go over. By this time in the next video, we'll be up to at least Elite. I've got a whole stack of Clarity Potions that I'm going to burn through to get this character done as quickly as possible, but because of the creative nature of what I'm going for here, there may be some changes to the hotbar, and there is likely going to be some changes to the skills that are being used in and of themselves. So, what I mean by changes to the hotbar is that currently I am switching between weapons, melee and ranged, by using a press of the 2 key. What I may end up doing is flip-flopping the switch hotbar button, not even flipping it. It'll just be the secondary activation of the 2 key. So 2 will switch my weapons and it will switch my hotbar, because what I'm thinking is that I want to have a specific set of abilities on my ranged and a specific set of abilities on my melee. Meaning that anytime that I hit the 2 key to swap between the two, I have access to brand new stuff that makes it more unique to play one side or the other. So right now it's kind of just, it's mostly ranged for this build, which is a little bit sad because the melee is it feels better to play, but it can't do any sort of damage when it comes to just standing there and sustaining with auto attacks. So I really have to rely on the guns and kiting and keeping away from enemies and kiting them onto the mines or the runes, instead of letting my melee abilities do anything at all, because I don't have any melee abilities apart from Shadow Strike and technically Amaras's Blade Burst if I did decide to use that with my melee weapons, though still up in the air. But that is one thing I'm going to be working on in the next video, so keep an eye out for that. Also, feel free, I mean, if you're already playing this build, if you think that that sounds good, switch up that hotbar, have fun with it. Your right and left click will always change depending on which weapon set that you're using, so you don't have to worry about changing that. You just have to worry about making the toggle between your action bar buttons work with both sets of the weapons. So, that being said, that is everything that I've got for this video. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll be back next week with the conclusion of this. And the week after that, we've got the Diablo 4 server slam, so there's going to be a lot more Diablo 4 builds on the channel right before the release of that game, which I'm mega excited for. There's going to be some more D4 this week as well. I've got another Barbarian build in the wings that I wanted to showcase, so that'll be coming up. But hey, you know, thanks so much again for hanging out. Let me know in the comments what you think about this build, what you think about this game. IGN did a list of other action RPGs leading up to Diablo 4 that people should play, and this one was on it. I didn't think they did a very good job representing how much fun this game is, because I think they only got like the first 15 levels worth of character, but they did put it on there, so maybe that drives a little bit of, you know, engagement with this game, which I think we can all agree people need more of in their lives, especially action RPG players. I also wanted to do some Last Epoch eventually, but that is, I don't currently have a max level character in that game, and a lot of my time has been spent in Monster Hunter and Grim Dawn, as it is lately, and some Mega Man Zero, so yeah, that's not something that you're going to see on the channel anytime soon, but I do want to get Last Epoch a fair turn of it before I completely lose myself in Diablo 4. It may not end up as a video, but it may, so we'll see how that goes, see how it shakes out. But apart from all that, again, for the 15th time this video, thank you for hanging out. I will see you all next time. Peace out.